So I really didn't feel like filming this, which is a great way to start off a video. Because, well, the last few weeks have sucked. That's it. That's the whole story. They just sucked. And I haven't really had energy to do anything, but I figured not filming this would be a waste of my efforts and talents, so I might as well. And if this just ends up being boring, I'll just splice it in with, like, footage of my cat. He's sleeping under a blanket right now. And I walked over and woke him up and he got grumpy. How you doing, buddy? Little baby cat. So a penny for your thoughts? Get it? Because we're making a Pinafore today. And now that I say that out loud, I bet you anything that there is an item for sale on ModCloth called Pinafore Your Thoughts, because they love, like, labeling all their merchandise with, like, cutesy punny names.
Yep, there was. And there was also the Sims 4 download.
Yeah, Santa is still here, if you haven't noticed. Half the Christmas decorations are put up and there's still, like, boxes out from, like, it being halfway done. My Christmas tree is still up. And I should probably be cleaning and doing something about that. But I just needed something that seemed easy. A Pinafore is basically like an overall dress.
Did my voice just crack?
So there's two components, a skirt and a bib. So we need to figure out what we're doing for the skirt and for the bib. Now for the skirt, I know that I want it to be nice and full, but I don't want it to be gathered or pleated at the top. I want it to be just like smooth at the waist and then flare out, which gives us two options. We can either take a nap. That's what we can do. There's two things we can do for the skirt. We can do a circle skirt, which is basically a giant donut that you put over your body. Or a panel skirt, which is basically pizza slices that you sew together to make a skirt shape. And each of these methods have their own issues. This is the fabric we're using, by the way, the one that I'm sitting on.
And I didn't mention I got this for $4 at Goodwill in the bedding and curtain section.
So I think I'm just gonna do a circle skirt. So yeah, you enjoy this time lapse while I enjoy making it.
Circles are shapes, so we need to do some math. First, we need the diameter of our donut hole. Well, actually we need the radius, but that's just half of our diameter, which is 3.14 of our circumference, which is our waist measurement, which is 25 inches. So 25 divided by pi is 7.9, which is basically 8, so half of that is 4. Using my tape measure like a compass, I drew out a half circle in the top middle of the fabric. For the length, I wanted it to hit below my knee, which was roughly also around 25 inches, so I measured out from our donut hole, marking that length around the entire skirt. There wasn't quite enough room on the fabric for a full half circle, but that's fine. The skirt still ended up with plenty of volume. I folded my fabric into fourths to make sure everything was symmetrical, and then I guess my camera died because the footage just kind of stops. Whoops. I knew I wanted the skirt to have pockets. In addition to being extremely useful, they're also historically accurate to literally every single other period in time except for this one. I freestyled the shape, making sure it was large enough to fit my cell phone, and cut 4 pieces out of the scrap fabric. Next, I measured and cut out 2 strips for the waistband, and naturally Ignatius had to stop by to make sure I was making good progress. After a little cleanup, it was time to work on the bodice. I went with the trapezoid shape so it would be open in the back. For the length of the bottom, I used my waist measurement, and for the top, I measured nip to nip. For the height, I used the measurement of roughly my belly button to sternum, and then I connected the 2 parallel lines.
Sewing involves a lot of geometry, which is the math class I paid the least amount of attention in. Why couldn't I pick a hobby that involved calculus? Not that I still remember any calculus. I swear, geometry just tries to be confusing. I mean, a square is a rectangle, but it's also a rhombus, but neither a rectangle or rhombus is a square. And I think they're all parallelograms, and none of those things are trapezoids, which is what we're cutting out here.
I cut 2 of the fabrics so I would have a front and a lining. Once I ensured that everything was lined up and symmetrical, I needed to give the bodice some shape. I traced out a curved seam starting roughly where my armpit would be and going down and across my chest. You could also do darts here, but I preferred the look of the seam. Next, I went to my sewing table, only to discover that it was an absolute mess, so before I could start sewing, I had to clean, which was the one thing I was trying to avoid by doing a sewing project in the first place. The reason why everything was in such a state of disarray is because my household came down with COVID-19 shortly after Christmas. I feel very fortunate that everyone recovered, but the experience was not easy on any of us. The constant mental fog and extreme exhaustion made it hard to do just about anything, which eventually turned into depression and frustration. Both my mental and physical state made this simple project way harder than it needed to be. I spent a lot of time being confused and ripping out seams. But I wanted to make this video anyway, because I think that that's very true to life. Many of us use hobbies as a form of therapy. When everything else isn't quite going right, it's a way to escape and create. So chances are we aren't always going to be our happiest, most productive selves when doing our hobbies. So how do we do that? How can we find joy in creating when the creating becomes taxing? I will say getting my work area cleaned felt nice. Even though my brain still felt very cluttered, at least my desk wasn't. The first thing to do on the machine was to pin and sew the curved seams of the bodice. I personally don't have a lot of curves, so the bodice is still fairly flat, but I knew I could go in and increase the curve later, and I had to start somewhere.
And on first inspection, it seemed to fit well.
So I went along with the next steps.
Y'all, these pockets. My COVID brain could not wrap itself around this concept. Because the skirt is right side out while the pockets are inside out, and I had no clue if I was pinning right sides to wrong sides, and it didn't help that both sides of my fabric looked the exact same. Anyway, I eventually figured it out. So you're going to sew in between these 2 pins on each side and then sew around the perimeter of the entire skirt seam and pocket. I think you just gotta take things slow sometimes. Cut yourself some slack, you know? It's okay to fix things, and at least sewing allows for things to be redone. Because as I would soon discover, even though I had done my pocket correctly, I had done it completely backwards from the side I had already done. So I was done. Sometimes you just gotta walk away.
After a break and a hit on my mental reset button, I kicked back with some TV and some seam ripping and was eventually ready to move on. I attached the skirt to the waistband and thought about what to do with the straps on the bodice. I decided the strap just coming out of the top looked too much like a cooking apron, which was not exactly the aesthetic I was going for. Instead, I thought it would look better to attach the straps along the length of the bodice. Before doing this, I did have to go in and increase the curve on my bodice seams. This process involved more seam ripping and cutting, which I couldn't find my fabric scissors for some reason, which was making this harder. And I kept thinking back to the show I'd been watching about the arts and crafts movement. This was both an artistic and social movement during the Victorian era, started by William Morris and other prolific figures. It was about lifting up the working man, bringing life back into art by appreciating true craftsmanship and finding joy in handmade items. Yet, there was no joy to be found here. But that's the thing, joy is a vital part of creating and shows in your final work. Sometimes you just gotta take a deep breath and remember how fortunate you are to be making something with your own hands. And sometimes you lose the seam ripper you were just freaking using after you just lost your fabric scissors, and you feel so overwhelmed like you're losing your whole freaking mind, and you just keel over and die right at your sewing table. But eventually you come back to life, and that's the thing. It's one day, one project, one seam. None of this means that you're bad and hate sewing, only that you're human. Breaks can be taken, issues can be fixed, and you can come back with a renewed energy. It's important to keep a sense of both humor and pride. Laugh through the mistakes and take pleasure in your accomplishments. I attached the front and lining of the bodice together. Even though I didn't need to worry about raw edges on the side seams, I went ahead and sewed around the whole thing. Next, I securely pinned the straps and the skirt to the bodice so I could do a fit test before I continued on with the rest of the final sewing. So what I discovered from trying it on is that the waist is sitting a bit too low. I need to shorten the torso so it's more like here. It just overall sits a little nicer and is more flattering. And the straps I had going at too sharp of an angle. There wasn't really room for my neck or to have them crisscross. So I repinned them with more of a gradual curve around the edge, so that they sit a little nicer, and I determined where to have them cross and pin in the back, which I can't really show you guys. Ugh. Anyway, back to sewing. At this point, all that was left to do was putting the pieces together. I attached the straps to the bodice and then the bodice to the skirt. When I cut out the bodice and waistband, I hadn't noticed that the patterns would line up. Except it didn't line up. It was about 1/2 inch off according to the skirt, which I had already attached to the waistband. I thought I could just roll with it and have the side seams be off, but this was the wrong decision. After I started to feel a bit better, I went back and I redid the skirt and zipper, I serged all the raw edges and put in a simple hem. It took me about 1/4 of the time of my previous attempt once my brain was back to working order. But even with a working brain, I probably still wouldn't have checked my bobbin and sewed this whole waist seam without any thread. You know, I eventually did find joy in this project. Having all the final pieces come together and look just like my vision and seeing how well it all fit me was a really great boost to my spirits. Even when things weren't going that well, it was still a really nice distraction that helped get me out of my funk. At the end of the day, I think this piece did keep true to the arts and crafts movement. It's something sustainable, simple, stylish, of good quality, and most importantly, it makes me happy to wear it. Now the reveal!
At the end of the day, I love this Pinafore, and I guess that's what I want to end this video with. One way to have things you love is to make things you love. We all have those items that we bought at the mall or somewhere that we like the idea of, or the print or color or whatever, but you see it in your wardrobe and you also think, but the bottom's a little weird, or the collar's a little itchy, or in a certain place it doesn't fit quite right. And so we think a lot about wearing those items, but we never actually really end up wearing those items. But I know that I'm going to go to this piece in my wardrobe time and time again because it fits me perfectly and it's perfectly my aesthetic, and that's such a great feeling. I know these videos aren't very instructional. Hopefully you're just here for just the process and not the tutorial, because these don't make great tutorials, but I hope what they can do is inspire you to seek out that knowledge to learn how to sew. And I really encourage people to pick up the hobby because it feels so nice to be able to craft a wardrobe that just makes you feel more like yourself. So to follow me as I make more things I love, be sure to comment, like, subscribe to my YouTube channel and this video. You can now find me on Twitter and Instagram at Vixen_, VICSIN, and I can't wait to see what we make next.
Bow, bow, ba-chow. There's like music playing. Bow, bow, ba-chow, bow. Well, that's like porno music.
Don't get my hairy legs.